Next on AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show. Here's Brian O'Neill.
Glad to have with us on our live line Assemblyman Phil Palmesano. Assemblyman, thanks for calling in.
Good to be with you again, Brian.
Well, Assemblyman, a few things going on this week. One, you're on is this a new committee, the General Government Local Assistance Budget Committee?
It's basically one of the budget conference committees, because after the two majorities passed their one-house budget bills to outline what their priorities are, and we could talk about some of that later, they constitute budget conference committees in certain areas to kind of just make recommendations to the main conference committee who's negotiating with the governor on a three-way budget deal. So, yes, and that my leader, Brian Cole, appointed me to be our representative on the General Government Local Assistance Conference Committee.
That's great. And a few weeks ago, you were in the news for being appointed to another committee besides that by Kolb.
Yes, he appointed me to the Ways and Means Committee and the Insurance Committee. Those are new committee appointments. The Ways and Committee is the committee that oversees any bills that have any fiscal impact, whether it's a budget bill or a one-house budget resolution. They go through those committees first. So it was a privilege to be appointed to that committee and dealing with those fiscal bills that come through our committees before they get to the full house. So that's a big honor to be on that committee. I was pleased that he put his trust and confidence in me to put me on that committee. So I look forward to serving on it and continuing serving on it.
Okay, Assemblyman Palmesano, where are we now in the budget process?
Well, as you know, last month we concluded our budget hearings that were going on through January and February. What happened last week was both the Assembly and Senate passed their one-house respective budget resolutions, which basically what that is, it basically outlines the priorities of each individual house, what their priorities are going into the three-way budget negotiations with the governor. And then what happened at the end of last week after that took place is that we had their first round of conference committee meetings. They call it the mothership, which the speaker and the majority leader serve on and all the leaders serve on, which kind of oversees all the other budget conference committees like the General Government Local Assistance that I serve on. You know, there's going to be recommendations made, but basically the leaders are now in the process of negotiating with the governor about what a final budget outcome is going to look like, hopefully by April 1st. But obviously, if you're reading in the news, there's constant infighting between the governor and the legislative, the Assembly majorities, Democrats in the Senate and Democrats in the Assembly, as far as what can they do in the budget and what they can't do. So they're in control. They're responsible for it. Right now they're fighting about it, what's going on right now. And what we continue to do is kind of highlight what priorities should be included in the budget. But I think when you look at the one-house budgets, particularly in the Assembly, I think it sends the wrong message. It doesn't really make things go in the right direction. They're talking about more tax increases, spending above the 2% cap, things of that nature, no tax cap, no unfunded mandate relief, maintaining cuts to veterans programs, no increase in the CHIP space aid in the Assembly budget. Unfortunately, the Senate one-house budget included the $150 million increase to CHIP space aid, which we were calling for. The Assembly budget only included the $65 million in winter recovery funds that the governor cut. We can do better than that, and I think we need to do better than that. That's something Senator O'Meara and I have been trying to lead the charge on and trying to get more publicity behind and advertising behind, and we had the rally with the hundreds of highway superintendents who came up a couple weeks ago. We're going to continue to make that push and that argument as we get to the April 1st budget deadline, because we think it should be a priority, and that's something we're going to continue to push for.
Assemblyman, as you were talking about the New York City Democrat state lawmakers arguing with each other, I was kind of wondering, does the AOC, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, does she influence the state lawmakers? Not necessarily directly try to influence them, but does Ocasio-Cortez, is she an influence with her policies and beliefs on the New York City lawmakers?
I think to some degrees, directly or indirectly, because we have our own AOCs, but light, I would refer to them, AOC lights, who were elected to the state Senate, many in the city and Long Island, who are pushing for a radical extreme agenda. You've seen it in some of the policies that we've already instituted, whether it's this extreme abortion law that allows abortion in the late-term abortions up until the moment of birth. You've seen, with more and stringent gun control type of legislation, the infringement upon the Second Amendment. Those are the types of policies that continue to be advocated by really not your traditional Democratic Party. I talk to Democrats all the time. The traditional Democratic Party that our parents and grandparents might have known has been hijacked by extreme liberal progressive policies that are very dangerous and I think out of touch and out of line with the values we talk about, particularly in upstate New York. And even from the poll you mentioned earlier, that even people in the polls are saying that they think upstate's being ignored. And you can see that in the policies that are being advanced by this governor and in the legislative leaders in the Democratic Senate and Democratic Assembly. That's why we need to continue to stand up and push back, and that's what I'll continue to do. Senator O'Mara will continue to do, Assemblyman Giglio, Assemblywoman Marjorie Burns for our area. We're going to continue to speak out and advocate on behalf of the people we represent.
Now, you mentioned the poll that I read in the news there, the New Siena College poll that's out today. They were the New York residents were against the Amazon deal getting messed up, and they feel that the Democrats are going too far to the left. Okay, next question. Governor Andrew Cuomo, they say, follows the polls closely and is kind of, a lot of his moves are based on what the polls are saying. If that's true, will Cuomo keep to the left with AOC and people like that, or will he veer more to the right?
So that remains to be seen. I mean, this governor certainly has shifted his tune. I remember from the first 2 years of his administration, he governed pretty conservatively, especially on not on social issues, but on fiscal issues. We have some challenges with our fiscal budgets, and obviously we need to see where that goes. But certainly with the governor's race with Cynthia Nixon, he moved to the left on a number of policies, particularly on the social issues, whether it was the medical marijuana night. Now he's got this Green New Deal, which we talked about. I'm not going to get into that again. That's a whole other show. The Democrats are obviously pushing for a single-payer system. Fortunately, Governor Cuomo, a single-payer in New York, which would be devastating to all our industry in New York and our taxpayers and our ratepayers and everybody. He seems to have said we can't afford that. I'm glad to see that he's made that comment. It's kind of scary, though, quite frankly, that we have to rely on Governor Cuomo to be the cool head in the room, the calm head in the room with the legislative leaders. But that's where we need to put that pushback on him, because he represents the entire state. He represents upstate New York, and it's not enough just to go hand out checks and saying, I'm doing my job for upstate. No, it's some of the policies that you're implementing and the damage it can do to upstate New York. For example, you mentioned the letter that Senator O'Mara and I sent out recently to legislative leaders on this so-called Farm Labor Practices Act, which, quite frankly, Brian, would be absolutely devastating to the family farm in New York State. And we can get into some of those statistics if you'd like to talk about that.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you that. My first question is, okay, they would force farms and family farms included to pay overtime to people, including family members, who might not want to charge their own families. Question. Would that apply eventually to would they move on from that and expand it into non-farms so that all family businesses have to pay overtime to family employees in, I don't know, any business?
Well, I know the specifically towards farming, but Brian, the overtime cost is one part of it. They're also talking about mandatory day offs, and I talked to apple growers who said that they hired immigrant labor that came in, and they said, hey, you know what, just take the Sunday off. And then those workers left his farm and went someplace else because they wanted to work every day. These immigrant labor farm workers are trying to make as much money as they can to send back home. So giving them a mandate, make it instead of mandatory, make it an optional. But they want to stay. They got the overtime costs. The other part of this is the collective bargaining, which would allow farm workers to unionize, which could basically put hold a farm at hostage because if they're not getting certain things that they want, they could basically say, I'm not going to go out in the field and do what needs to be done out in the field. And especially at a time it's critical for growing and picking and harvesting, they could hold hostage a farm like that. And that would be devastating. And what the studies have shown on this bill, Brian, right now, the fact of the matter is there's a study back done in 2016, and here's the numbers that are staggering for listeners if you listen to this. The farm labor costs in 2016 as a percentage of net farm income nationally was 36%. That's nationally. But in New York, it was 63%. A huge differential. That shows what disadvantage our farms are already at and our family farmers are already not at. And this study has also shown if this act were to go into effect, it would increase the already exorbitant farm labor costs by over $300 million or 20%, resulting in an across-the-board drop in net farm income of 23%. Now, what would that do, Brian? It would drive many of our family-owned farms out of business, and 90% of the farms in New York State are family-owned farms. Now, my colleagues in the city who are pushing this type of legislation, they want their milk, they want their products, they want their fruits and products and vegetables on the table for their kids in the schools, for their families, but they don't want to pay any more for it. So this would just devastate the agricultural community in New York State, as we know. Agriculture is the number one industry in our state, number one, period. But this would devastate that industry, and I think this is just another representation of the misplaced priorities that we're seeing from Democrats in New York City, progressive liberals who are trying to advance a policy. And what I've said over and over again, the biggest advocates for our immigrant labor are our farmers, are our agricultural community. And what Senator Wlea and I have asked for in this letter, at a minimum, based on the impact this could have, is to have hearings throughout the state and listen to every agricultural region across the state before you advance this legislation any further. Because make no mistake, if this legislation were to be passed and signed into law by this governor, it would be a death knell to the family farm in New York State. And then this is something that should concern every New Yorker in upstate and in New York City, because where are we going to get our product? Where are we going to get our agricultural products from? Where are we going to get our milk, our cheese? Where are we going to get our potatoes and our vegetables and our fruits from? That's what would devastate our industry. It would devastate families, something that's been the hallmark of our community, of our state, in our region for decades. And I can't fathom what's going to happen to our agricultural industry and our family farmers and their family-owned business generation after generation.
Assemblyman, are they targeting the big farms in thinking that it's, the downstate Democrats are thinking that the big farms aren't paying enough to the workers when they could, and it's affecting the smaller farms too? Or is this targeting family farms specifically? How's it work?
I think they're just targeting agriculture and farms in general, but I think they have this misconception. And that's when I did the exchange with some of my colleagues from downstate. They had this perception these farms were these big corporate operations, but they're not. And then we showed them that they're not these corporate operations. They're family-owned farms, whether it's a dairy farm, whether it's a vineyard and a winery. They're family-owned farms. Are there some big corporate-type farms? Sure there are. But that's not the crux of what we have in New York State. 90% of them are family-owned farms. And legislation like this would be devastating to that. That's why when I had this exchange, when I brought them up before, I take them to a dairy farm. They went over to see the Mahaney's potato farm that year. We came a couple years ago when we went over to Alston when you were there. We went over to Murray's Mahaney potato farm. They've been to the vineyards. They see these are family-owned farms, and that's what I'm hoping some of my colleagues who are influential in this will realize this, that not move too fast and not do something so drastic, which would be devastating to the family-owned farm that we have here in New York State. And this bill that they're pushing, that some of the advocates are pushing, is really mind-boggling to me, because they're not going to end up helping the people they're trying. The people they're trying to help are the ones they're going to actually end up hurting, because there will be no jobs for the immigrant people to work on the farms, because there won't be any jobs left, because there won't be any farms left. And then what are they going to do? And if you talk to the immigrant labor, they want to work 7 days a week. They want to they want to work as many hours in a day as they can to make as much money as they can to send back for their families. They don't want these restrictions, and I just think that these people, these advocates, think they know best, and they don't know best. And these policies they are pushing, make no mistakes, and I just hope the listeners understand this. This would be devastating to upstate New York. This would be devastating to New York as a whole, because you would devastate the one industry, which is the number one industry in their state, but that is like the hallmark of family-owned businesses, generation over after generation. And think that this legislation, again, to remind you, this would increase already exorbitant farm labor costs by $300 million, or 20%, and result in an across-the-board drop in net farm income of 23%. That means that we're going to devastate and drive many of the family-owned farms out of business when we're already at a competitive disadvantage nationally, because I already told you the earlier statistic that the farm labor cost as a percentage of net farm income in New York is 63% back in 2006 versus the 36% nationally. So basically, we're going to have all these people who are going to want their agricultural products. We'll not be able to get them from New York. They're going to have to get them from out of state. It's going to increase costs that way, too, because they're going to be shipping and things like that. I just don't understand the rationale why people would want to devastate the family farm in New York State, and that's what's going to happen if this legislation will move forward. That's why we're pushing against this legislation. That's why we're demanding and calling for these hearings to be held across the state, and particularly in our upstate areas and on Long Island, every agricultural producing region of the state, they owe our farmers and our family-owned farmers at least that before they try to pass and shove down our throats some devastating legislation that would kill the family farm in New York State.
Going to take a quick break and then check the forecast. We'll be back with Assemblyman Palmesano in just a moment. Stay with us.
Want your vehicle looking just like it did when you drove it out of the dealership? Then stop by RBS Auto Detailing on Canisteo and Pine Streets in Hornell. RBS Auto Detailing. The before and after photos of your vehicle won't come close to showing the great job they'll do for you. Cleaning, washing, and waxing. They can get your vehicle looking nice and new both inside and out. RBS Auto Detailing on the corner of Canisteo and Pine Streets in Hornell.
Checking in with meteorologist Rob Killen. Rob, cold out there this morning. What's the week look like?
Well, it looks like temperatures are going to suppress below normal for a couple of days, Brian. We've got this northwesterly flow bringing chilly air into the region. We've still got some areas on the Great Lakes that aren't frozen, so there's been some lake effect cloudiness, even a little bit of lake effect snow close to the lake this morning. I think we'll probably be far enough downstream that occasionally we'll break into a little bit of sunshine, but it also looks like we'll run the risk of maybe a stray rain or snow shower today. Big story, temperatures, they stay below normal. We're only 35 to 40 this afternoon. This time of year, we're supposed to be up around 45 or so. Looks like we're going to be partly cloudy tonight, chilly, 15 to 20. Tomorrow, high pressure continues to build our way from the west. Lots of sunshine, still on the cool side. Highs are only going to be near 40. Tomorrow night, clear, 20 to 25. More sunshine for Wednesday. We finally start to warm up by Wednesday. Temperatures will reach 45 to 50. Brian, sunrise earlier today was at 7:16. It'll set tonight at 7:20. Getting close to that vernal equinox on Wednesday, and that's when we'll find 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of night.
And we're back with Assemblyman Phil Palmesano. Assemblyman, we talked about immigrant workers in the last segment. I wanted to ask you a couple questions there. Number one, the immigrant workers. I've talked to farmers who have told me that a lot of times they can, and I don't, I won't say any names, but I've talked to local farmers who said to me a lot of times they can't get local workers to do it, so they get immigrant workers to do it. Is this something that will affect local workers as well, or only the immigrants? Or tell us about that.
Well, I think something like this will have a ripple effect across our entire economy. I mean, obviously, with this particular bill, we're talking about labor practices in the agriculture industry. Now, I know there are local workers that work in the agricultural industry as well. Maybe some of the work that our immigrant labor does, some of the local people don't want to do, but that doesn't mean there aren't local workers who work in the industry.
Okay, thanks for clearing that up for us. So this is something that's going to affect, I'm guessing, both the immigrants and the family members and other local workers as well, who might not necessarily be family members on the overtime deal. How that last group that I mentioned, how would they be affected by the overtime? Are there a lot of non-family members working on overtime on family farms?
I don't know what the percentage of local workers are that work on family-owned farms. I don't have that statistic, but if they're working on a family-owned farm or a farm, and if this legislation were to go into effect, it would certainly impact that. Where they would be impacted, in probably a negative way, quite frankly, this legislation, make no mistake about it, and I hope the audience understands this, will shut down many family-owned farms across our region and across our state. It would be devastating to them, to that industry, to our family-owned farms. So yes, if a local worker is working on a family-owned farm and the family-owned farm has to go out of business, so where's that local worker going to work now? They're not going to work on that farm. Maybe they enjoy working on that farm. Maybe they enjoy doing agricultural work. But yes, I understand a lot of this is focused on immigrant labor because there's a lot of immigrants working on our family-owned farms and farms throughout New York State. But if a farm shuts down, whether you're a local worker, a family worker, or an immigrant labor, you're not going to have a job. And then what are you going to do? What's going to happen? So this legislation will have a ripple effect through our entire economy, through the workforce at every level.
Okay, and who's pushing this? Is this coming from Democrat State Senate Leader Andrea Stewart Cousins of New York City or Governor Andrew Cuomo? Do you know exactly whose brainchild all this is?
Well, there's two senators. There's a senator, I think it's Senator Ramos, I want to say, and Assemblywoman Kathy Nolan in the Assembly are pushing this. But where I'm concerned is I've heard the governor in the past because there was protections in the law relative to farm labor work, and the governor, there was a lawsuit that was filed by some groups to challenge the farm labor provisions we have right now that have these protections for our labor community. The governor would not allow the attorney general in the state to defend that lawsuit, which is the job of the attorney general is to defend the laws on New York State in the books. He would not. The attorney general wouldn't do it. The governor would not do that. So the only reason they had good defense was because the Farm Bureau stepped up and they paid the legal costs and had interveners and had lawyers fight that case. But so the governor has, from what I've heard, has been somewhat supportive of this type of legislation. And if he does that, ladies and gentlemen, God help us all. And that's just another example of the governor catering to outside interest groups and not looking out particularly for upstate New York, because many of our agricultural farms are found throughout upstate New York. If this bill passes, which they could pass based on the numbers, we know it. If the governor were to sign this bill, he would just be, without, in addition to his ink going on the paper, it'd be like the nail in the coffin of the family-owned farm, and that would be on Governor Cuomo. And he better understand that. And he better understand that clearly, that he cannot sign this legislation because he would devastate the family-owned farm. He'll say, well, I've given all this money and all this other stuff. You can't go out there and say, I'm giving money, that's not enough. Just because you hand out checks for industries and through your different competitions, that's not the same thing. He would be directly responsible for putting the final nail in the coffin of the family-owned farm. And I hope if Governor Cuomo's peoples are listening, his representatives, his advocates, those who advocate on behalf of Governor Cuomo, I hope they, and they support Governor Cuomo, I hope they deliver this message to Governor Cuomo. He cannot support and advocate for this Farm Labor Practices Act because he would devastate the family-owned farm in New York State. So you advocates out there, you supporters of Governor Cuomo, I hope you hear that message and deliver that message to Governor Cuomo specifically on this issue. Please. Tell him.
And we're out of time. With that, gotta go. Assemblyman Phil Palmesano, thank you so much for joining us as always.
Thank you, Brian. It's always good to be with you.
Last Thursday, the Senate voted against the president.